Thank you, friends, for taking the time to be with us today. I want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us today in this courageous conversation on how the church can do better for our young girls when it comes to sex, self, and speaking up. I want to thank you ahead of time for sharing this video with your friends. So go ahead right now. Go ahead, share. And make sure that your crew knows about what we're talking about today. And we always like to meet new virtual folks. We always love educating new people. So please go ahead and do share. Don't forget to show us some love if you love the conversation by engaging in the chat, showing us some love with some hearts, or liking the webinar. So I'm your host, if you don't know already, Dr. Liz Rios. I'm the founder of the Passion Center. And today I have a co-host with me, someone that I know from way back, who also went to the same Latino Pentecostal church that I did. Actually, she was there way before me. Let me introduce you to Nilda Felix, a girl mom with experience raising two very different young women.
Yes.
Welcome, Nilda. Thank you for joining me, amiga.
I'm so honored to be on this chat. Very honored. And yes, we go way back.
We go way back. Don't let the nice, very creamed up faces fool you. We go way back,
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And I want to thank you for being here because I know this is a courageous conversation. And a lot of times people haven't heard our side of things. So I told people that I was going to spill some tea today. So we're going to do a little bit, just a little bit of that.
Yes.
And so here's the deal, folks. I wanted to do this discussion because both Nilda and I had just a little bit of trauma about this subject stemming from the way the church dealt with some of the things that are mentioned in the book that we're going to be talking about today. And essentially, we have both thrived. And we are in healthy, hot marriages.
Amen.
In spite of what the church taught us or what people told us.
Amen.
Right, Nilda?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we still love God.
And we still love God. That's a very big, important conversation.
That is the most important thing, that we still have a relationship with God and we love the Lord. And no matter, despite everything, we are still in love with God.
We are still in love with God. And thank God for God, because if it was not for the way he loved us through so many situations, we wouldn't even be here. Absolutely. And in conversations with Nilda, we realized that we had similar traumas. So I thought there was nobody better than to do this with me today than her. Because one, she's not afraid to tell the truth. And both of us, again, really care about how our young women are being brought up in the church because, again, of our own experiences, and Nilda, because, she's a girl mom and a girl grandmom, so she gets it. So before we get into our personal stories where we share just a little bit of our tea, let me introduce you to the one that started this whole conversation, that sparked us into going deeper into our own stories, author Sheila Ray Gregory, who I interviewed. Hey, Sheila.
Hi, great to be here.
I'm so glad you're back. Last time we had you when we were talking about the Great Sex Rescue book that you put out. So those of you who haven't seen that video, you got to go back to the Passion Center page and look at that video through our video page, because it was a great conversation. And this time we're talking with Sheila about her newest book, She Deserves Better: Raising Girls to Resist Toxic Teachings on Sex, Self, and Speaking Up. Woo! When I got this book, I was like, oh, this is like my favorite girl. She's talking about the things we need to be talking about. So welcome back, Sheila. We'll be asking you some questions in a few minutes. But before we get there, we wanted to share a little bit of our backstory and why this book resonated so much with us. So I'm going to let Nilda go first and share a little bit about, what is it that made you say, you know what, I got something to say about this?
Yes. Well, as Liz said before, I am the mother of two amazing young women. One of them has two girls. I'm grandmother of two granddaughters, and my youngest one just had a son. So just raising my girls in the Lower East Side in a Pentecostal church, although very different from when I grew up in the same church, a little different. There were a lot of things that I encountered that were being taught to my girls that I didn't agree with. So I had to step in and just make sure that my girls were healthy. And thankfully, they turned out pretty good. I have my oldest daughter is a registered nurse, and my youngest daughter is in entertainment. And that was a challenge, especially for my younger one. Just being in a very strict environment in the church. But you know what? We got through it with God's wisdom, with his help, only through God's wisdom, and allowing him to impart into my life so that I could impart into their life, right? Was I able to overcome a lot of the challenges that I went through with them.
Yeah, thank you. And knowing your story, I mean, I just think it's just a testimony to what God can do. And everybody always has an opinion, and we just got to shut it down because people always got something to say, and they don't know what God's plans are for any of us. And I'm so thankful for that, because even when I was growing up in the evangelical church, and again, I want to put this out there, they did not know better. I don't believe that they did it on purpose. At least I hope not. I believe that they just didn't know any better. But this is why we're doing this today, because if there's anybody out there still teaching these toxic teachings, we want to stop it in its tracks. So when I was growing up, I remember again being told that I wasn't the good girl, basically, that everybody thought that their daughters were. They thought their daughters were, but they necessarily, not all of them were. Yeah. So they just didn't know what the subculture was in the church, because there's always one. And so Sheila, in her book, I'm not going to talk about all of these topics, y'all. So you need to pick up the book, okay? Because that means that we would have to have like an 8-session a webinar, okay? But I'm just going to go through the contents. She says she deserves to be set up for success, understanding how the church influences your daughter's self-esteem and well-being. She deserves a big faith, defining our faith by fruit, not underline, bold fundamentalism. She deserves to be heard, while emotional health isn't attained by just telling her to be joyful in the Lord. She deserves to be respected, teaching girls to draw bold boundaries. She deserves the whole story about dating, while a one-size-fits-all approach won't work. She deserves to be protected, identifying red flags for toxic people. Woo! We needed that crash course a long time ago, but we're giving it to you today. She deserves to know about her body, why sex ed isn't the boogeyman you've been told it was. And I live in Florida, so we have a lot of boogeyman over here. She deserves to understand consent. Boys will be boys, and other lies the church tells about assault. I mean, Sheila, you going in, girl. You was going in. She deserves to exist as a person, not as a threat. Your daughter is not a stumbling block. And last, she deserves permission to be big. Girls come second to Christ alone. Woo! I'm telling you, this book is fire, y'all. You gotta pick it up. She deserves better. This is something that you gotta give to your daughters. Have it in your youth group. All your youth leaders should be reading it. Pastors, especially y'all, because you be part of the spreading those tricky teachings that are toxic. Not all of you. Don't worry. I don't want no hate mail. I know all of you are not doing this, but some of y'all are, and you need to pick up the book. So my sister Sheila, we have these stories. Nilda shared, she has some things going on. When I was younger, and I'm going to share my quick story. I was 14 years old. I was dating an older gentleman. My mom never told me about anything really. All she did, I was telling Nilda about this when we were talking about this. She showed me a picture of my cousin that he has sent a family picture, and she said, don't get one of these in the picture. And what these was a hickey that he had on his neck. At that time, I didn't even know what it was called, and she didn't even tell me that it was called that either. But I remember, coming back from an event, and we were me and my boyfriend, we were kissing, whatever, and he did kiss my neck, and he did give me those things. He gave me a hickey. And I remember thinking when I went back into the bathroom, I said to myself, oh my God, I got the thing. I got the thing. How am I going to get out of this situation? And I just remember that the next day I was supposed to be going to my aunt's house in Boston. And it would have been fine. If I could just get through Sunday, come on. If I could just get through Sunday, I was going to be able to make it without, being in trouble. But it was after service. A friend of mine called me and I turned around. I had my collar up because that was the trick at that time. Put your collar up, nobody will see it. And I turned around and my mother saw it, and she was right in front of me. And she saw it, and she was like, she pulled down my collar. She was like, what is that in Spanish? And I was like, trying to be all cool. I was like, it's a rash, Ma, it's a rash, And, of course, my mother said I wasn't born yesterday. And then that was it. The whole church in the front of the building just was interested in what was going on. And my uncle at the time was a deacon of the church. And he told my mother, who was a new believer, you got to tell the pastor about this.
Oh,
the pastor got to get involved here. So that's what she did. It was like we had like a whole a consortium of people telling her, okay, this is, you got to do this. You got to send him. So everybody went to my house, and I went to sleep because that was the best way for me to just like forget all this craziness that was going on. But they were all talking in the kitchen, saying how they were going to go and talk to the pastor at the night service, because we had an early service in the morning, and then we would break and then have a night service. And we went back to the service that night, and my mother tells the pastor, look, this is what happened. And my uncle's there. And then the pastor says something that stood with me forever. He said, I talk about this in my book. He said, she has the mark of a prostitute.
Oh, my word.
And it stayed with me forever. And look, I mean, I'm crying now. So it's emotional, because I survived that because God, really. Because then what happened was that all the my friends' moms were like, okay, she's not a good girl to hang out with. And then I got even more for you. And the church, because the custom at the time was to put you on discipline. They told us we had to be in the service, me and the gentleman. And then they called from the front. The pastor said, Elizabeth Delgado and the gentleman, not to name him. Those of you who go way back, y'all know whoever's watching. And they said they're on discipline for 6 months. And it was crazy, because what the church did was ostracize us, put the scarlet letter on us, and basically kick us out of the church for 6 months. We couldn't socialize. We couldn't do anything with anyone. And wouldn't that be something that my husband bringing me tissue? See, I love that man. And being able to survive that was difficult, because there were times that I said, I shouldn't be here, because I'm not like everybody else. My mom wasn't a regular attender. She was still a new believer. And a lot of the church mothers, they didn't treat me that good. They really, and I remember that even one of the guys that I was dating at the time, well, afterwards, even his mom would bring it up. So again, these kind of things mark you. And I am the fabulous person that I am today. No thanks to a lot of those people. And all the glory goes to God, because he
Amen.
saw me and reminded me that I am special and that I'm valued. And I love what you put in this book, because you remind young girls and you remind the moms that fall in line with all these toxic teachings. And I hope you pick up the book, because you are part of the problem in the churches when you align yourself to these toxic teachings.
Exactly.
And I just believe that this is going to be a book that hopefully will open up a lot of eyes. So that's my backstory. And I know Nilda had her stuff as well, which probably will come up later. But what is it? What is it, Sheila? That did you hear these stories? Did you see people weeping? What made you decide to write this very important book?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. But there's a word that you guys both used, and you've used it over and over again as you were telling your stories, and it's the word despite.
Mm.
That you guys are okay despite the church.
Thank you,
How
Lord.
terrible is that? Like, don't we want to be okay because of the church? Don't we want to thrive because of the great things that the church has done? How terrible is it if we're all here saying, yeah, I'm okay, but it's despite the church?
Yeah.
And if the church is truly the body of Christ, that wouldn't be what we're saying. And we need to get real about this, that in many ways, the church is hurting us and it's not doing the work of God. What struck me about your story, Liz, is did anyone even check if you were okay?
No.
You're
I could have been left. I was left for dead, really. Come on. I was left for dead.
You're 14 years old. You're with an older guy. Did anyone check if that was consensual? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was, but I'm just saying, like,
I didn't know what he was doing, so he didn't ask my permission either.
yeah,
But
like 14 years
I
old.
didn't know. Yeah.
14 years old, they're treating you like a harlot instead of saying, okay, wait, something's going on here. This guy is obviously using her sexually, and like, let's just make sure that she's okay. Why is that not our first instinct, to make sure that she's okay?
Yeah, no, and definitely. I mean, I don't think he was trying to do any of that. I mean, we were in a dating relationship, but he was older. He knew much better than I did, and
But still,
I didn't know
14,
again.
14.
Exactly, and my mom didn't take the time to even explain what that was, so I didn't even know that you could get it by somebody kissing your neck.
Yeah.
So I really do think that no, nobody checked. I was alone. I was alone, basically. And it was really just, I guess, the Holy Spirit that drew me back into that space where I felt so rejected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And look at the things that God has me doing now, starting church. I mean, gosh, God has a sense of humor.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. What we did. So in the first video that I did with you, the first live, we looked at Great Sex Rescue, which is based on our survey of 20,000 women. And we were looking at if there are certain teachings that are really common in evangelical church spaces that end up hurting sex and marriage for women. And the feedback from Great Sex Rescue has just been amazing. So many people say, they feel validated, they feel freed, they feel seen, they see God in a new way. It's been wonderful. But then everybody was saying to us, but now I don't know what to do because I was raised with toxic teachings. I don't want to pass these toxic things on to my kids. But I also don't want to tell my 14-year-old, go do whatever you want. So it's like, what do we do now? And that's what She Deserves Better came out of, is we decided to answer the question, well, how do we talk to teens? What do we do with teens? So we did another huge survey, because that's just what we like to do, is just torture ourselves. So we did another huge survey of 7,000 women this time, asking about their experiences as teenagers, what they went through as teens, whether they dated, what their sex ed was like, but also what things were you taught in church specifically about gender, about sex, about dating, and how do those impact you long term? And we uncovered a lot of really bad stuff that the church is still teaching, and we've got to get this right.
It's funny you mentioned that. What is the church teaching? So my husband and I started in ministry, in children's ministry, and then we went into youth ministry, and we were youth ministers for about 10 years. And I remember when we first started talking, we talked about sex in our youth group. And I remember my poor pastor getting all the complaints about what on earth are these people talking about. And the reason why we even talked about sex, and of course we were talking about protection and what you shouldn't be doing. giving yourself space so that you don't get into a situation where you have to make those decisions, right? Knowing when there's dangerous things and talking about boundaries. And I remember the pastor getting a whole bunch of complaints, like, why are they talking about this? And we told them, we did a survey with our youth, anonymous, about certain things when it came to sexuality. And some said that they were already having sex anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So we felt even more of an urgency to address these issues. And yet the parents wanted to just stay in la la land.
Well, I think we have this idea that if kids know stuff, they're going to do stuff. And so we must never, ever teach them stuff. And if we want our kids to wait until marriage, then there is no need to teach about consent. There's no need to teach about any of that stuff because you shouldn't be having sex anyway. And so let's just not even talk about it. And that's what we did. Is the only thing we ever told kids was don't do it.
Yeah.
And what we found when we actually looked into the data is that there is no downside to more information. Okay. The more kids know and the younger they know it, the less likely they are to have multiple sex partners, the higher their self-esteem, the less likely they are to marry an abuser. Like there is no down.
Oops. Yep.
Happened to us. There we go.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened there, but there is no downside. And I think so often we're just afraid that if we tell our kids things that they're going to go do it. And that's just not what happens.
No.
I know. Even our politicians, right? Think that.
Oh, here's another big one. And the more terms they know, the more sex ed terms they know, the less likely they are to be abused in church because 20% of our girls are actually sexually harassed or abused in church.
Absolutely.
And so the more terms they know, the less likely they are to be victimized as teenagers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you think, Nilda?
I totally agree because sometimes knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
If you are knowledgeable in certain areas, you're going to know, it's just going to click, right? If you're you're blindfolded, you're like, it's just not going to work. I'm telling you, I can speak for myself and for my mom, who really truly believed whatever came out of the pulpit. It was never taught at that time to research. It's whatever was taught, that's what you accepted, and that's what you did, right? So that she passed that on to me. And I remember, my gosh, one example that I can give you, and it's sad, right? Because we really think that everyone that's within the church and everyone that's a leader in the church is a wonderful person and they would never harm you. And that is such a lie.
Yep.
Such a lie. I remember being maybe 13 years old or less and having a pastor pick me up from my home for a day trip. And I remember exactly where we were going, to Washington, DC. And my mother trusted this person. Picked me up at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'll never forget that. And because I trusted and I didn't know any better, and it was never taught to me to be careful, this and the other, got in the elevator. He proceeded to want to touch me. I said to him, I'm going to tell my mom. And his response to me was, she's never going to believe you. Yeah. You know what happened? I never said anything. Yeah. Because I really believed she was not going to believe me. This was a man of God. And so when we don't train our children to be aware that just because you have a title and just because someone is saying whatever it is up there, that doesn't make them a saint.
You know, this is a big thing we do in the book is we take kids through how to recognize good character and to remember that you never unquestioningly follow anyone.
Exactly.
And if anyone wants you to unquestioningly follow them, that is a huge red flag. And so, we have at the end of each chapter, we have like exercises you can do with your kids, just to help them figure out boundaries, to help them recognize toxic people. But it starts with allowing your kids to disagree with you. Because if
Mhm.
your kids can't disagree with you, if they can't stand up to you, how are they ever going to stand up to
Yes.
someone who's hurting them? How are they ever going to stand up if they're in an abusive relationship? How are they ever going to say anything if they're in a terrible friend group or if they're in a toxic workplace? Your kids need to be able to disagree with you. It doesn't mean you have to go along with what they say, but you
Mhm.
need to let them say what they're thinking. Because often as parents, we want to control our kids. We're very uncomfortable if they're upset or if they disagree with us. And we see that as rebellion. But you know what? You want to raise a girl who can say no.
Yeah,
Because if she can say no to you, she's going to be able to say no to other people.
Yes.
absolutely. And
And I
that's
want
the
to say,
thing.
I want to say too, like Nilda was in a situation where she couldn't say no with that pastor. And
Mhm.
sometimes our kids are going to tragically be in those situations, but you want them to know that they can come to you afterwards and that you will believe them.
Yeah, yeah. And that was the reason why at an early age, I made sure my children heard that story,
Yeah.
because I wanted them to understand that they could say no and that I was there to defend them and that I was
Mhm.
going to stand by them. That's so important,
Mhm.
for our kids to understand and to know that we're going to be there to support them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I told all the stories that I have in my past that I went
Mhm.
through. I sat my children down and I told them about it. And I
Yeah.
explained everything to them so that they can understand. They can come to me and they can talk to me.
Mhm.
No one is allowed to control you. No one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my mom said to me, when my daughter was about 13, well, actually, no, she was about 5, 6 years old, my oldest daughter. And I would let her talk back to me. And my mother said, "Oh, wait until she's 13 and she's going to talk back to you." And I'm like, "Okay, then I'll deal with it when she's 13." But I want her to speak back to me. I want her to tell me what she's feeling.
Mhm.
That's important. And I think that parenting, it's difficult, right? Because you're with teenagers, especially teenagers, and you're saying, they have their little mouth and they contradict you and whatever. But it's worth it, man. It really
Yeah.
is.
Absolutely.
Have a dialogue with them, have conversation with them, let them speak to you, and then you
Mhm.
sit and you talk to them, man. That's so important.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I wanted to say two things about that. One, we already know in this day and age that I believe anyway that most people see that pastors aren't perfect and youth leaders aren't perfect. We've seen it through the media, all over the place. Unfortunately, how many people have been abusive? How many people have had
Mhm.
crazy relationships and taken advantage of their young people, or just other people in general, just women in general. So I'm hoping that with all of that information out there, that people already have that radar up that, okay, wait a minute,
mhm,
I can't just blindly trust anybody. But also, even for someone like myself that didn't have a mom that was in church all the time, that was still, she was still a new believer. Those are the type of people that these kind of predators, I'm going to call them, look
Mhm.
for, because
Mhm.
nobody's looking for you. Nobody, you don't have the people that will, your mom is not there, so they know that you don't have that. And I appreciated some of the church moms that would open up their home to me, so that I could stay around the church, so that I could go back to service later. And they would cook for us, and we would
Mhm.
talk and everything like that. So big ups to them, because they were the moms that a lot of people like myself didn't really have.
mhm,
So and they weren't, they were still strict. I want to put it out there. They were still strict, but they opened up their home and made it a little bit harder for people to abuse us in many ways. And you talk about in your book also, Sheila, that one of the things that they talk about a lot in these evangelical spaces is that um, for a girl, faith is about staying a virgin and getting
Mhm.
married. And I
Mhm.
was, if I could have like highlighted that and like, I mean, goodness, that was it. That was the main thing that everybody was drilled into their mind, that you had to be a virgin. And if you weren't a virgin by the time you got married, then you were worthless. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. And you in page for those of you who are going to buy the book, okay, write this down on page 39, 40, and 41. She talks about that, and you mentioned there's this word cloud, and it talks.
Yeah, I was about to show you. That's what I have open right here.
Cloud. That's
Yes,
right.
that was
the
incredible.
word cloud. Is that it says purity, joy, marriage, temp, love, trust.
Yeah. Yeah, this one is the Christian. No, wait, this one is the books to Christian girls. Okay. And this one is the New Testament.
Wow.
Right? Isn't that a drastic difference? And you mentioned it, that why is it that there's more in common to what the church is teaching with the sex cult than with the actual Bible? So talk a little bit more about that, Sheila.
Yeah. So what we did, and there was something that came through the evangelical church and movement sort of in the mid 90s to around 2015, but it was still there before. But, we started what I call purity culture. It was still in pockets. And it sounds like you guys grew up in that even before that, because I think you're probably more my generation, Gen X. But it really started for older millennials. They grew up in purity culture because it became mainstream. So it was still in a whole bunch of different churches, but it became mainstream in the mid 90s. So when I was in church at a typical Canadian evangelical church in the 80s, you know what we were talking about? We were talking about evangelism. How do you share your testimony with your school? How do we pray through the unreached people groups in the world? We lived in Toronto, which was one of the biggest cities for immigrants in the world. And we're like, there's all these unreached people groups and they're all moving here. How can we reach them? And we were so focused on reaching our city for Christ. Now, did we believe that you should still stay a virgin before marriage? Of course we did, but that wasn't the main focus. And then suddenly something changed. And that is the whole thing. And during purity culture, your faith was defined by your virginity, which is darn scary on a whole number of reasons.
Yeah.
But, first of all, your virginity is something that can be taken from you. And to tell a girl that her worth is determined by her virginity is just nuts. Because that can be taken from her by force, which is awful. But also it's very anti-gospel. That's not of Jesus. Jesus said, if anyone is in Christ, she is a new creation. And the Christian ethic is not virginity. The Christian ethic is chastity, which is making the decision every day to put your sex life under the lordship of Christ. And that is a decision that you can make every day, which means that even if you did something that you wish you hadn't done yesterday, you can decide today that you are going to do it today. And we told girls, though, that once they had sex, they were going to be damaged goods. They were not going to be able to ever achieve the intimacy that God wanted for them in marriage, that parts of them would always be tied to the person that they had sex with or the person that raped them. That they would never, soul ties, that they would never enjoy the great sex life that God has for them. And those things really hurt girls long term when they believed those things. Even if they didn't have sex, by the way, even if they did wait for marriage, it still hurt them long term.
Yeah. I think it did hurt them long term. I mean, even for myself, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to say to my husband or actually my fiance at the time? And can I think about sex? Can I actually have a conversation about this? Like, what do we want to even, I remember when we were getting premarital counseling, the pastor told us at the time, that only one sentence: sex gets better as you get older. That was it.
I hate that message. It's such a dumb message.
So we were like, okay, nobody told us anything about that. And again, I'm so thankful that I've always been a very inquisitive person. I've always asked a lot of questions, which got me in trouble a lot. But it made me the person that I am today, and it made me the learner that I am today. And I was always looking, I need to understand what's going on here. What is it that I'm supposed to feel in certain ways? And how can I also be pleasing to my husband? And what can he do for me? It's not just about me for him, but him for me. And that's why I love your great sex rescue book. Again, make sure you pick it up. If buy both of them, okay, people? Because God wants us to have good sex, and the way we learn about sex made us feel like we were dirty if we even thought about sex. And that, you know, I started watching The Handmaid's Tale. And I'm sorry, but the way that is presented in that series is kind of like how it was presented in church. Just lay there and take it, and that's it. And so we had this warped thinking about not only you know, going into marriage, but going into the bed and trying to have relations that were pure and healthy, but we were told that if we had, you know, certain thoughts, if we even had an idea of how we wanted it, or we were already nasty people. So I just want to again and reiterate what you said. We're not here to tell anybody that you should let your child, your daughter have sex, or even your son have sex early. But we are saying that you should have the conversation. Don't let the church be the ones that are training your children what to do and what to say, because they have it all wrong.
Yeah, and then make sure, I mean, not all churches have it wrong, but certainly they have in the past, a lot has in the past. And then make sure that you know what your church is teaching, because sometimes you can say all the right things, but if the church is giving the wrong, like some of these toxic ideas and they internalize them, it hurts them long term. You know, if you
talk
want
about the books though, Sheila, you said Lies Young Women Believe, Every Young Woman's Battle, The Bride Wore White, Passion and Purity, When God Writes Your Love Story, For Young Women Only. I remember these books being passed out to young girls as like almost like the Bible on how to date and find the man for yourself, you know?
You know, it's so funny because when we were trying to find secular books directed at teen girls just to compare them, there aren't secular books that are just about relationships that are bestsellers. Like when you look at Christian books for teen girls, they're all about relationships and purity and staying a virgin and dating. When you look at secular books for teen girls, they're about like emotional health and boundaries and friendships, and like certainly dating is there, but it's not the main thing. And it's just incredible that our faith was isolated to just being about boys. And then at the same time, they tell you that you're not supposed to date and you're not supposed to think about sex. But every book that you're reading is all about sex. It's crazy. You know, but we can tell our kids good messages without saying toxic stuff. Like, you know, you just say to your kids, look, you know what? It is totally normal to want to have sex. You know, you're created with hormones. You're created with a drive that you want, a drive towards intimacy, a drive to connect. That's totally normal. And when you like someone and you're with someone, you're going to want to have sex more. And that's why it's really important before you even get into that kind of relationship that you decide what your boundaries are. And then you make a plan to stick to those boundaries, because there's very good reasons to wait. And you can talk to your kids about what some of those reasons are, what you want them to. But then say, and even more important than that, you need to stick to the boundaries of the person you're with. And if you're ever with someone who's trying to push past your boundaries, that's a red flag that the relationship isn't safe. And that's what we need to be saying, instead of just saying, don't think about sex. Don't think about sex. It's wrong to think about sex. Kids are going to think about sex. You know, tell them that.
Exactly. I remember telling Nilda that my professor in school, Dr. Leonard Sweet, in seminary, he was talking about how some of these things are really crazy, because telling people that are now getting married like in their 30s, okay, people are getting married way later, to wait. And when in the biblical times, they were getting married at 12, 13 years old, it was much easier to just hurry up and get married so you don't burn, as they say, right? It was a much easier thing to do than in this context. So again, you know, yes, there's a lot of reasons why you should wait, and you shouldn't, you know, just like sleep around haphazardly without thinking about these things. But if you end up doing that for whatever reason, you end up, you know, sleeping with someone, God forgives. There's redemption. There, He doesn't look at you like you're a dirty piece of paper. He loves you no matter what, no matter what. And I think the message that was cast out to young women, especially, the message was for the guys, push by the bound. That's what the girls are there for. The girls are there, again, Handmaid's Tale. The girls are there for you. And don't tempt, and the girls were like, don't tempt the boys. Don't tempt them, because you're going to make them want you. And that's the worst thing that you can do. And if they do end up having you, then you're worthless. And so these are the two things that I feel that parents, and again, church leaders should really consider. That yes, we still want to teach them, our kids to wait, to do things with thought in mind. Not necessarily that sex is dirty, because that's what they were saying. They were saying that sex is dirty, and that if you did it before marriage, that's it. You were like almost not even getting into heaven, So those are the messages that we have to make sure that people get. Even if that happens, no, we want you to wait. And these are the reasons why. But if it happens, because again, people are getting married way later than ever in our country. What is the message that we're going to tell them? That you don't belong in church anymore, that you're cast out, that not only are you cast out of this church, but that you're cast out of heaven. We have to be careful. And again, yes, disclaimer, I know not every church is doing this, but for those of you that this fits, I hope that you will pick up the book and have more awareness about the messages that you preach from the pulpit, and even in your youth ministry, because again, a lot of that stuff happens in the youth ministry as well, the purity culture message. So
the damage that we do to our children it's insane. I remember growing up, and we were talking about this yesterday, Lisa. You lose your virginity and that's it for you. I'm sorry, but that was it. No man is going to want you. No one. So whoever you lost your virginity to, that's who you marry regardless. If he was a good person or a bad person, it didn't matter whether you loved him or you didn't. You married them because you had no other choice.
And you were married in God's eyes.
Right. You were already married in God's eyes. So let's take it to the next step.
It was insane. I remember crying because I didn't deserve the white dress that I had on.
Yep.
Walking down, coming down the elevator.
Yep.
Because I didn't deserve that white dress.
That's right. Right. That's the sadness.
I didn't go into a marriage happy.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I did not want my daughters to go through.
Yeah. One of the things that we found in our data too is that when women believe that if you have sex before marriage, you will never have the sex life that God wants for you, what happens is they get married and sex isn't great. And you know what? For a lot of people, sex isn't great at the beginning. I think that there's ways to get around that. But for a lot of people, let's face it, sex isn't great at the beginning. But instead of working on it or communicating about it, often what they think is this is God's punishment for me. And so I'm never going to, I'm never going to get that great sex. And so they just put up with it because they don't realize God's not actually punishing you. This is just kind of normal to have to figure things out and to have to talk about things. But the idea is God is punishing me. And that's just tragic because it can short circuit all the normal communication patterns that we would have to figure this out.
Absolutely. I remember when I was pastoring, one of the couples in the church came up to me, and because my husband has a habit of giving illustrations with me, okay? And one of the couples came in and asked me, like, how do you talk about, what do you want to wear when you go to bed, your nightgown, And I was like, oh my gosh, as basic as that, the person didn't even know, like, how can I ask my husband, do you like this nightgown? What kind of nightgown would be nice for you? She didn't even know how to get into the conversation. And the thing about what you write about in the book is that, we talk about sex so much. We create this hyper-sexual, hyper-spiritual environment for young girls. They end up, like Nilda said, picking the wrong man because they had sex with the person, thinking that this is the way to go. This is how I make this wrong right. I make this wrong right by marrying the guy that I don't love, by marrying the guy that I didn't even want to do this with, whatever the case may be. And also we have this thing in our mind that because if he loved the Lord, because we're looking for those guys, right? We're looking for the guys that are like in church all the time, and super spiritual people that we think they are. And then we find out that maybe sometimes they're not all of that that we thought they were. But you mentioned in the book, and I'm going to read it in page 115. You talk about in a book with Sarah Bessie actually talks about it, and she says after Tozer died, Ada was his ex-wife, remarried a man named Leonard Odom. Later, when she was asked about the difference between her marriage to the great man of God and her current husband, she candidly said, "I have never been happier in my life. Aiden Tozer loved Jesus Christ, but Leonard Odom loves me." And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because I think that is another thing that has driven women to marry the wrong person.
Yeah. We have this idea that the best husband is going to be the one who is the most sold out for Jesus. And so the more sold out for Jesus they are, the more they know the Bible, the more they're volunteering, the more they're at the church, the more they're in full-time ministry, then the better spouse they're going to be. But A.W. Tozer, who is, he wrote some super influential books. He wasn't a really good husband. They had a whole bunch of kids that he basically ignored. He never got a car because he wanted to donate most of his money back to the church. So she was forever lugging 6 kids on public transit while getting groceries in the winter, with snow everywhere. She lived a really hard life, and he was hardly ever home. He spent most of his life just reading and praying. And then he would write great books about prayer, but he was never with his kids. And is that really a marriage? 1 Corinthians 7 says that when you're married, you're supposed to care first for your wife, not just for the Lord. And yet a lot of people don't do that. And a lot of the rhetoric in the evangelical church about the marriages that we admire are actually marriages that weren't that great. You think about Billy and Ruth Graham, okay? Like, he was never there for his kids. And some of his kids have even said that. You think about Elizabeth and Jim Elliot. That was a really dysfunctional relationship. He was martyred in Ecuador in 1956. And she wrote some big books that were very influential in the purity culture about their relationship. And it wasn't a good relationship. But we think, oh, isn't this romantic? Because he was totally sold out for Jesus. And I if a guy is going to ignore you, he shouldn't be married. And it's okay to be totally sold out for ministry, but then don't get married.
Exactly.
Then don't get married.
And those are the ones that a lot of people give the stamp of approval to, though. And again, I don't want no hate mail. I'm not telling you don't marry a guy who loves the Lord. We want all our husbands to love the Lord, but they should have their priorities in order. In order. They have to have
and just because someone says that they love God, just because someone goes to church, just because someone knows the Bible, does not mean they have good character.
And we've seen that all over the media. Hello.
Yeah. And I think often we think, okay, I just need to marry a Christian. And so here's a checkbox because he's a Christian. And so therefore he's going to be a good partner. And what we do in She Deserves Better is we help you go through with your daughter to figure out, well, are they actually showing any fruit of being a Christian? Or do they just like Christianity because it gives them power over people, or it makes them feel self-important?
That's such a good point. They will know him by their fruits, right? They will know us by our fruits. And while you're dating, while you're even thinking about dating, they're already showing you who they are. And Maya Angelou said it, when people show you who they are, believe them. Hello. Pay attention. And don't think, oh, it'll get better when I get married. No, it'll get worse, because then he already got you.
Yeah.
So you have to pay attention to those things and know what you're looking for, and know that, again, just because somebody, and I have a few people that I know that could testify that just because they were, in the usher board, or they were the deacon, or they were this or that, they ended up being terrible when it came to character and in the way that they treat them. So we have to be careful. And again, we have to have these conversations.
But your daughter will not know how to discern that if you can't discern it. Like women, we got to get better at this. We need to show our daughters, okay, that's not a safe person to hang out with. I'm really uncomfortable with how they talk. When you insist that your kids respect adults regardless, like respect all adults and never say a word against an adult, then you're telling them to ignore truth. And we actually want our girls to be able to see people's true character.
That's right. Like Lewis said, love Jesus and love your wife.
Yes. Yes.
That's important. That's important. And so you mentioned, and I thought that was an important story too, because again, listen, we deserve love. Our daughters deserve love. Our daughters' deserve love. And it shouldn't be that they have to choose God or love. God wants us to be loved. God wants our daughters to be loved and our granddaughters to be loved, and so on and so on. So please, pay attention to these things. Now you mentioned,
and I mean, I don't mean to change the subject,
no, go ahead.
But also not all of our daughters are going to get married. Even if they want to,
That was the other thing in the church. You had to get married.
Right. And the problem is, how do we teach our daughters to get married? We tell them, you just wait. God has someone amazing for you. You just wait and God's going to bring them to you. And we call this the princess in the tower theology.
You get prophesied over.
Yeah, exactly. God has someone and he's going to show up and whatever. But some of our daughters are not going to get married. Or some of our daughters are going to, and this is a tragic thing to talk about, and it's difficult to talk about well, so excuse me if I do this sloppily, but some of our daughters are going to miss out on the opportunity to get married because they think all I need to do is wait. And so they're not out there making friends. They're not getting involved in social circles. They're not being places where they could meet someone. They're just praying harder. Right? And if I just pray hard enough, God is going to give me a husband. And that doesn't, and then we talk to so many women in our focus groups who are like in their mid-30s and saying, I spent my 20s by myself praying and reading Christian books and journaling so that I could prove to God how much I loved him so that he would give me a husband. Like we're treating God like it's a pagan God, right? Who desires sacrifice and who we need to appease so that he can give us what we most want.
Yeah, but also too, I think some women are not getting married because women are deciding now that they want careers.
Yes, and you know what? That's okay. If you decide that, that is okay.
Yep. And that's the key again. That is okay, because for a while growing up, the message was, and again, whether it was implicit or explicit, it was, you get married. That's the, first come love, then come marriage, then comes Liz with a baby carriage,
Right.
That was the way it was set up for you. And so if you didn't, I know in Latino culture, they would call you jamona. How you say that? A spinster, right?
Old maid.
Old maid.
Old
That's
maid,
what they
yes.
called you. They would call you that, and they would be like, "When are you getting married? Hello, And then when you got married, when you're having a kid, it was always like on this time clock that people had. And y'all, we gotta take it easy. We don't have to put anybody on no time clock. They have their own way of fulfilling whatever it is that God has for them in their life. You don't have to put anybody on a time clock.
But another reason some people aren't getting married today is because the men in the church are not marriage material.
Ooh, go girl. Like, say the truth and shame the devil.
Like when the men in the church are just looking to get married so they have someone who will cook and clean for them and give them sex on demand, and they don't actually want a partner, then a lot of women are like, I would rather be alone and have my career and have my friends.
What is it? In Spanish, they say, mejor sola de mala compañía.
Yeah. You're better off alone than have bad companionship.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. But you're absolutely right, Sheila. When we talk about men in the church, that this is all they want someone to cook. If I knew that, I would stay alone, because I'm not your maid. I'm not your mother, and I'm not your maid. This is a partnership. We're going to work at this together, right? That wasn't taught to us.
Right.
You got married, you cooked, you cleaned, you raised the children. Another thing is, we also find young women who get married and are unable to have children.
Yes.
That's another area, which we're probably not going to get into today, but that's another area that is so, so now you can't have a child. So now what?
Right. So that's another label they put on you, another scarlet letter.
It's always on the woman.
Yep.
Always on the girl.
Shout out to the women that have withstood every label and are still
this is
thriving out there.
Yeah, but you have to teach your daughters. This is unacceptable. If you get married and you can't have a child, that's not on you.
Right. No. That's right.
And it's okay. And it's okay to grieve that and then see, okay, what is it that God has for me?
Exactly. But you have to teach your young women that these are things, obstacles that are going to come along the way. That can happen.
And that there's so many alternatives now to have children.
Exactly.
And
it's okay.
And it's okay. Exactly. And it's okay. And so that's really, really important. I know you mentioned too that that there's a difference that women should talk about to their daughters about dating, and the boundaries and things like that. Can you share a little bit more about that in today's segment? I say today because I think we might have to have another one. But tell us a little bit more about what should mothers be talking to their daughters about when it comes to dating?
Oh, there's all kinds of directions we can go. Do you want me to talk about more the consent side or more the dating rules side?
That'd be good because
I think the consent side is scary. Okay. The message that we gave girls went something like this. Honey, boys can't stop in a makeout situation. They have such high sex drives. They only want one thing. And so it is your responsibility to stop. So they can't stop the progression. So you need to stop it. They are the accelerators. You are the brakes. And this is what we told girls. The book for young women only by Shanti Feldon. Here, I have it right here. Okay, this book right here. That told girls that 82% of boys in their survey, which I don't think was accurate, but we'll leave it. 82% of boys feel either little ability or little responsibility to stop in a makeout situation. And their advice was, if you want to stop, it is safest to not even start. So let's be clear here, okay? 100% of boys have the ability to stop. 100% of boys have the responsibility to stop if you say no. Okay. And this idea that boys can't stop is toxic, because when you say that a boy can't stop, what you are really saying is a boy can't help but rape you. Is that what we believe? And we need to start using the real words for this stuff. Because if we said it like that, people would be like, no, we're not saying that. Well, that is what you're saying. When you say that a boy can't stop, you are saying a boy can't help but rape you. And we need to start recognizing it for what it is. This is why girls, we talked to so many women, Liz. We talked to so many women who didn't realize they were victims of date rape for like a decade or two. Wow. Because, Kay told us that she said no. They were making out. She said no. He stopped. And 2 minutes later, he tries the same thing again. She says no again. And this goes on over and over again. She says no. He ignores her. And so finally, she stops saying no. Because she knows that her no means nothing. Wow. But that is date rape.
Yes.
And she didn't know that because no one had told her that.
And that carries on to marriage.
Yep.
Into the marriages.
It does.
That's so true.
It absolutely does. And so we need to teach our kids what consent is. We need to teach our kids what coercion looks like. Talk about how if he's 24 and you're 15, that is coercion, even if you love him, right? If he's your gym coach, if he's your youth pastor, that's automatically non-consensual. And talk to girls about how they can violate a boy's consent too. It's not always, the boy violating you. You can violate his consent.
Absolutely.
So let's have these conversations and teach kids what consent means, because date rape is a real problem. It is huge. And we talked to so many girls, again, who married their rapist because they thought, well, now I've lost my purity.
Yeah, that's right. And also, to continue with that, some people were told that when they got pregnant, that they should, because, God has a purpose for that too. That was all planned. That was all the planning of God, Anyway, that's a whole nother subject. But I also want to talk about, and this, real rape is happening on college campuses all the time. We've read about it, we've heard about it in media. And again, it shouldn't take us by surprise, but the reason it does is because these conversations are not happening around our kitchen tables or wherever it is that you feel comfortable to talk with your children. And you have to start doing that. You mentioned in the book how even girls have a right to know their body. And you talk about, period embarrassment. And I was telling Nilda that when I was 11, that's when I got my period. And nobody had told me what that was either. I didn't get any schooling on anything. And I remember I was taking a shower and I was bleeding and I thought I cut myself. And I was like, I was screaming and whatever. My mom comes in and then she's like all amused and she's like, oh, la gallina cantó, which means the chicken crowed or something, or the rooster crowed or something like that. It's like a Spanish thing, like, oh wow, like you've come of age per se.
Right.
And I didn't think that was amusing at all. I'm freaking traumatized because I'm bleeding, and she's like, oh, like gallina cantó. And then once she told me, okay, this is what you wear, we went to my aunt's house, and then it was a party. Oh wow, Lisa, the gallina cantó, and everybody's like all excited and everything. And my aunt put me aside, and because I know I looked puzzled and confused and not amused. And my aunt took me to the side and she says, that means basically, that you can have children. And my grandmother tells me, don't wear a bathing suit and let a guy touch you because you could get pregnant. So for a long time, I was like, okay, I cannot wear a bathing suit at the beach and let a guy touch me because then that's it. So I had a lot of misinformation, but I didn't know about my body. I did not know that these are conversations that you should be having with your prepubescent daughter. So that when this happens, it doesn't cause her trauma, people. This causes trauma. Yeah. And you mentioned that also you have a whole section on period embarrassment and how you should go through this conversation with your daughters. But you also mentioned, as far as knowing our bodies, about what does an orgasm feel like, which again, not talked about. You talk about it more in your other book, The Great Sex Rescue. So again, get that book as well for you married couples out there. But I think that's another important conversation to have. Can you go a little bit into that?
Yeah. So
let's put that in the book.
Yeah. So first of all, the period embarrassment is kind of an interesting one because when girls are embarrassed of their period, they're like 4 times more likely to marry an abuser or something. Like, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And it's not because if you're embarrassed of your period, you're going to marry an abuser. It's not, there's something else going on there. But I think that something else is feeling like at heart, I am fundamentally wrong. There is something wrong with me. And so your self-esteem really falls. And when your self-esteem really falls, you're way more likely to marry an abuser because you're going to marry someone who agrees with you that there's something fundamentally wrong with you. So the more confident we can teach our girls, the more they can feel like, no, this is who I'm supposed to be. I'm good. Then the more likely they are to marry someone safe. The orgasm thing is kind of interesting. I can't remember now if the number is 30% or 40%, but I think it's 40% of women didn't even know the female orgasm existed until they were adults. So think about what that means. We're teaching kids about sex. So when we teach them about sex, we're teaching them that men orgasm because that's how babies come. But she doesn't do anything. She just lies there. Right. And so we're teaching girls the expectation is that he has a really good time and you don't. And that's what a lot of girls grow up believing. And so, a lot of women didn't even realize, hey, women can reach orgasm too until they're actually adults. And the younger girls are when they learn that women can orgasm as well, the more likely they are to reach orgasm once they are married. So, it's I know it's an awkward conversation. This is the thing, parents. It is okay to be awkward. Like, you don't have to do this perfectly. It's okay to mess up with your kids. I messed up with my kids so much. Gosh, when I talk to them about sex and puberty and everything, they laugh about it now. But we just kept talking. And by the time they were 14, 15, it was all fine. They would come to me with anything. So it's not like you have to do it perfectly, but you just have to show up. And you just have to keep having those conversations. And you can even go to your kids and say, look, You know what? We were talking last week, and I just think I handled that really badly. And can I just do a do-over? I'm sorry, but I think I gave you the impression that whatever it might be. And I
Mhm.
just want to say, here, have this ice cream while I'm talking, and you don't have to look me in the eye, but I'm just gonna say, this is what it really is. And it's all right to be awkward, but just make sure that you're telling them the truth.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. I know that with me, because of the experience that as well as Liz had, I never knew about my period. I was 9.5 when I got my period. Very young. I remember I was jumping rope. I came up, I went to the bathroom, and there was blood, and I was scared.
Mhm.
And my mom was an older mom, and she took a Kotex,
Mhm.
put it through the door, and said, "This happens to all girls," and just handed it to me.
Mm.
And that was it. I knew nothing other than that. I had a sister-in-law who then came in and kind of talked to me. I didn't want my kids to grow up that way. So once they turned like 6, 7 years old, because I knew that I got my period at 9.5, I didn't know what their development, how they were going to develop. I started to go at the time. There was a Christian publishing company on 42nd Street, 43rd Street, and the West Side. Liz would know. And I would go there, and I would just get every book that I could possibly find
Mhm.
to be able to teach my kids about this, because the church was not doing that.
Yeah.
So I had to take charge.
Mhm.
And that's what I would say to mothers today. Take charge.
Yeah.
If the church is not giving your child what is needed, you need to step in.
Mhm.
You need to do something about it, because you can't allow for what happened to you or to your mother or your grandmother to happen all over again. You can't.
Mhm.
And that's why I love your book. I love the part in the beginning when you talk about how we don't even know the names of our sex organs.
Yeah.
That's
That's so true.
Yeah.
amazing.
I
We
know.
don't.
At graduation, girls are more likely to know the
And
names
if
for the
you
male.
don't know them, if you don't know and what functions, what they're
Mhm.
supposed to be doing for you, how? How do you
Mhm.
live? And
Yep.
they're so important for us to teach our daughters.
Yep.
Yeah, I was talking to a woman on Instagram recently in the DMs, and she said she was their family had a youth pastor live with them, and when she was 13, 14, and he sexually abused her, but she didn't know that like oral sex was things that other people did, or that manual stimulation was something that other people did. And so when he had her do these things, she thought it was secret and that only they did them, whereas had she known that this was an actual thing,
Mhm.
then she would have recognized, oh, wait a minute, this isn't okay, and she could have told her parents. But because she didn't have words for things,
Exactly.
she couldn't talk about it. And so the more words we give our kids, it's actually very protective.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think going back to, let's have this discussion is that, like what Nilda did, like she told her kids, this is what happened to me. Like, I think sometimes too, we want to look so perfect to our kids that we don't share with them the things that maybe we didn't do right, or that we wish we would have done differently, that happened to us that we had no control over. Just the story of our journey, so that they can learn from them, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We keep that away from them, because just like we were taught, and I think this is what happens in some churches, underline some, is that we're basically taught how to be fake. Because you can't talk about anything. This is the only thing that is remotely okay to talk about are the spiritual things. But anything that has to do with being a human being, don't talk about it. And that's what gets us into trouble. And I think that's why we have had this culture where everything's a secret. And where does the devil have his heyday? When we keep secrets. And so we have to help our kids understand that we don't have to have secrets. I make my son uncomfortable because I know I'm like, hey, you want to talk about this? And he gives me this look like, oh my God, here we go again. But he'll talk and he'll tell me, what he likes in a girl, what he doesn't, what makes him confused. And yes, like Nilda said, sometimes when you hear what they have to say, you're like, oh Lord, have mercy. Help me, Jesus. Not have, put the poker face on, because you don't want to look so surprised when they tell you. But it is something to work towards. Maybe, a little bit at a time, however it comes. Let them take the lead in what they want to tell you. You don't have to push them, but open the door for you to have the conversation. Yes. And I didn't learn about my body until college, when I remember I took a class and they gave a book called Your Body and You. And boy, did I study that book, because I was like, oh my goodness, this is what that is? Oh my gosh, I was already 19 years old, a sophomore in college when this stuff I was being, taught about this stuff. So, and I just think, again, these are certain things that we shouldn't be ashamed of. God made our bodies. God made sex. There's a proper order for everything, and we just have to, share that with our children. You also mentioned in the book how it's that safe takes precedence over being nice. And I think that's another important conversation to have with our young girls, because we're, you want to be so accommodating that sometimes you don't forcefully say no, because you don't want them to say that you were not a nice girl. And so can you talk a little bit more about that in your research on that area?
Yeah. So maybe some of you guys have had this experience. So you're sitting in a bus and a guy sits down next to you and he's just creepy, right? Like maybe the bus was almost empty and he sat down next to you, and then he starts talking, and we're not rude. We don't say, can you please get up and leave? Or I don't want to talk to you. No, we just talk to them often because we don't want to be mean, and we don't want to make him uncomfortable, but he's already made you uncomfortable. True. And we don't think that matters, because our goal is to not make him uncomfortable. And we see this in all kinds of situations where girls are told, you just need to be polite. In several books that we were reviewing that were written to teen girls, Christian teen girls, they were talking about how to say no if your date is going too far. And Dana Gresh, in her book And the Bride Wore White, suggested that you write out 10 different creative ways that you can say no. Like, isn't it great that God is watching us right now? Or, my dad fingerprints me when I get home. Like, but she never said, you can just say no. Yeah. Like, just saying no wasn't an option. You had to say it in all these cutesy, fun ways. And now that's not okay. You're allowed to say no. Your safety matters. When my daughter's one of the co-authors on the book, Rebecca Lindenbach. And when she was 16, she was in youth group. And they were having one of those stupid sleepovers. I don't know why youth groups do these all the time, but, sleepovers at the church, the fun nights or whatever. And there was an 18-year-old boy there who was just creepy but dangerous. And he had been known to have sexually assaulted several girls at the high school. So this was a dangerous guy. And the girls were really uncomfortable. And so Rebecca was appointed to go speak to the youth leader. And she said that the girls were uncomfortable. And his response was, you guys are just being judgmental. And don't you know that he needs Jesus? And so their legitimate concerns for their safety were just passed off. The boys in the youth group recognized the girls' legitimate fears, and the boys buddied up so that no girl was ever alone that night, so that he couldn't get at anyone. But that's the youth leader's perspective, is don't you know he needs Jesus? And so these girls who are feeling really uncomfortable because there's someone dangerous in the youth group don't matter.
Oh my gosh.
No, I remember those kind of sleepovers, but I'm just so thankful that there's so much more information out there. There's no reason for anyone really to be ignorant anymore. And I just want to go into how we're going to be closing. And again, I just want to show the book again. She Deserves Better. Raising Girls to Resist Toxic Teachings of Sex, Self, and Speaking Up. So again, pick it up. It's available on all platforms. And the other book that she wrote, Great Sex Rescue, because again, that's really helpful for the couples. And to close, I just want to ask you, you mentioned in the book as well that we should, that the girls actually deserve to exist as a person and not a threat. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Because I know we have some stories about that too, how we were supposed to dress. I remember having to go to the lakes with a dungaree skirt and all covered up and everything. They never really told us, I don't remember anyway, that it was to not be a stumbling block to the guys, but it was to be more like pure, like so that we're not causing anything to make anybody think. But tell me a little bit more about that. Like how would you express that to parents today to help their daughters not kind of buy into that?
Okay, so we measured 4 different possible modesty messages. Ideas like boys are visual in a way that girls can never understand. A boy can't help but lust if a girl's dressed like she's trying to incite it. The stumbling block mess. So we measured a whole bunch of these messages. And what I can tell you is that these were some of the most destructive messages long term. So when girls believe that they are at least partially responsible for keeping a boy from lusting, they are 68% more likely to marry an abuser. Okay. They're 52% more likely to experience sexual pain in marriage. And evangelical women suffer from sexual pain disorders at 2.5 times the rate of the general population. So almost a quarter of evangelical women suffer from sexual pain disorders. And it's largely because of this modesty message, because the modesty messages tell girls the world is dangerous because of your body. Your body is a problem, and your body will put you at risk because men can't help themselves around you. And so you could find yourself in a dangerous situation because of your body. And that just, and so it's hardly surprising that our bodies react to that with trauma. And when you teach girls that all men are like that men only want one thing, that men are just gonna, they just want to lust after you, that's how they see you, then when a girl is with a guy who watches porn, who checks out other women, who's always leering, she's not going to realize this isn't a good guy. She's just going to think this is what all men are like.
That's a good point. And like I think somebody mentioned it in the comments. This stuff goes into your marriage too, because you're so afraid of just showing yourself that even in your own marriage bed, like I said with that couple that came to me, it was like, can I wear something like this? Is this acceptable? Like you're still covering up. You're still just feeling like I can't even do anything, even with my husband, it's just a lot of confusing messages. We're a threat. Our bodies are tempting for men, but then we're not. When we're in a situation where we're with our husband, we can't even fully express ourselves there as well. And so that's why like you said earlier, a lot of marriages. The sex life in the beginning isn't that great. And then if you're not even comfortable talking about these things, whether with your husband or with your spouse and your children, everybody's confused. And we just continue to perpetuate the cycles that we were a part of. So again, I just hope that people today that are watching, I hope that if you came in late, rewind this webinar and listen to it, pick up the book. The book again is She Deserves Better. And also The Great Sex Rescue, because I think these are conversations that are very spiritual. Yes, they are, because God created these things. There's no reason to hide from them and make them dirty. We are the ones that made them dirty. People are the ones that made this dirty, not God. And so, yes, did people get it twisted? Absolutely. But we have to be the ones also to be like the Bereans, right? And show up and study so that you understand things and you don't just take what somebody is teaching you and just take it as the gospel.
Yes.
Read people. Look at webinars, listen to podcasts. There's too much information in this information society, too much information out there for you to continue to be ignorant and for you to continue to spread toxic teachings. It's just unacceptable. So I'm hoping that this will, jar you a little bit and make you think. And yes, this was one of probably besides our great sex rescue conversations, this was probably one of our hotter topics. So you see, Sheila, what you start? But I see all over Twitter and Instagram that, this is a big deal for a lot of people.
Yes.
People are always constantly talking to you about that. So we are opening it up for questions. If there's any questions that you would like to ask Sheila while we have her on, go ahead and put it in the chat. While you do that, I'm just going to pass it over to my co-host, Nilda. Is there anything else that you want to say to the people that are listening today?
I just think that you have to be, a lot of people ask me, how did you raise your kids? And, they're not perfect humans, obviously, but I always say you have to have an open heart. You have to have an open mind, listening, and you have to, when you go before God, God gives you wisdom. Be open, mothers. God will direct you. When something is wrong, He's going to show you. He's going to show you, and you have to be open to that. You can't say, oh no, that can't be. That's this perfect youth leader. That's this perfect pastor. No. If you're uncomfortable about something that is being taught to your child, speak up. Speak up. Let your child know that you have her back. That is so important. When your child can come to you and you say, okay, they said this to you. Let's talk about it. That's the most important thing that I can think of. That's how I raised my kids. I pray that I wasn't perfect. I didn't do everything right, but that's one of the things. I wanted them to be open with me. Let me know if they were uncomfortable, or if I felt uncomfortable about something, I was going to say something. Period.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Sheila, as we close, what are you hoping this book will accomplish for the people that pick it up?
Our big message is this: church as a whole is good for kids. Okay. And multiple studies have found this, not just our studies, both our studies found this, but so many studies have found this that they don't even study it anymore in psychology. Everyone knows it. Church attendance, having faith, you end up with better marriages, better sex lives, better self-esteem. It's great. But we also found that when girls internalize a lot of toxic teachings, they actually would have been better off never going to church at all. If you look at their future marriage outcomes and self-esteem outcomes. So church as a whole is great. But as soon as you're in a church situation, which is teaching all this toxic stuff, suddenly it's not. You don't want that for your kids. So let's find the healthy places. Let's speak up if we're in toxic places, and don't keep those places toxic. And if it's just so toxic you can't make a change, then go somewhere healthy.
Yes.
Our kids deserve better. And the reason that the toxic places are still there is because we're propping them up.
Yep.
And it's time to say we deserve better, because this isn't of Jesus. Jesus loves his daughters. Jesus wants us to thrive. And so let's make sure that we're going to places that actually want our daughters to thrive.
Absolutely.
Amen. And that's the key. Find out what they're teaching when you take your kids to youth ministry. Find out what the youth ministers are teaching. What's the curriculum? What are they talking about? Because again, most of the books that you mentioned in the book, a lot of churches use them. And this is the other thing. We are in the evangelical industrial complex. That they are the dominant force out there. They're the ones that have the publishing houses. They're putting the money behind so many different writers. I mean, recently there was another publisher that they had to scramble to take his book out, and all the stuff that he was saying, because the way he used his metaphors with the male anatomy.
Yes.
And I could put it in the chat later what that book was, but so many we just are too simple-minded, thinking that everything that comes from certain places must be okay. But we have seen the contrary, folks. We have seen through various documentaries, we've seen through media and journalism that we have a lot of people in that are faith leaders that don't even practice what they profess and what they tell you themselves. So do the extra work. Our girls deserve better, and
Yes.
this is why I also am an advocate for spaces where they don't limit women, where women, there's no limit at all for them. They can do whatever God has called them to do, because I believe that those patriarchal teachings align and put women in these categories that make them more susceptible to accept these messages. So moms, dads, whoever's watching that is a mentor to young girls, you know, pay attention when
Yeah.
and when a young girl tells you something, you know, make sure that you are that person that they can talk to, that is a safe place for them, that they don't feel that they can't talk to. Because most of us, like Nilda said earlier, you know, we for her and I, we didn't really have that. Our elders were not there for us. They just weren't. Whether it was because I think it was just they just didn't know any better. They were just repeating the cycles. But we know better now. We know better. So we can do better. And that's what we're asking all of you to do as you listen to this, to just consider that our young girls deserve better. Think about your own upbringing, your own journey, and what you would have wished was there for you,
Yes.
that you can, you know, have for your young girls or the people in your church and things like that. And please don't continue to spread the toxic teachings that are out there. And if you don't know what they are, again, pick up the book. She Deserves Better. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Nilda, for joining me today as co-host. Thank you, Sheila, for always stirring the pot and giving us that good information that most people are a little bit too timid to talk about. But it's so important. And I believe that the work that you're doing is making us better moms, better parents, better leaders, and helping us to look at ourselves to do better. So thank you. God bless you all.
Thank
and
you.
remember, everybody, you can do better.
Yes.
God bless.
Bye-bye.